Each year, your IAR Government Affairs team represents the interests of realtors at the Indiana General Assembly. This year, as we closed the 2014 session of the legislature, we're happy to report to our members that we had a very successful session. We had a number of issues that we were able to promote on behalf of realtors, and more importantly, advocate against some very harmful issues that may have collectively hurt your bottom line. In even-numbered years, the Indiana General Assembly meets for a very short time. A bill from its introduction to its enactment happens in a shorter period of time than almost anywhere else in the country. We call those even-numbered years short sessions. A lot of work in a very short time, and quite a bit at stake. The effective date of most legislation that passes any General Assembly is typically July 1st of that same year. So we thought this was a good time to do a quick overview on some key pieces of legislation that passed that will be effective July 1.
Realtors and their clients will soon have a resource when it comes to meth-contaminated properties. With the help of your state association, members of the Indiana General Assembly recently passed House Enrolled Act 1141, which directs the Indiana State Police to create a database of such properties. The legislation also puts into place guidelines for listing meth-contaminated properties. This will help realtors provide an important consumer protection when dealing with properties known to be affected by meth. This new law reaffirms what realtors have already been practicing in regards to the seller's disclosure form. If a seller has actual knowledge of meth production or contamination in the residential structure of their property, the seller must disclose the information on the seller's disclosure form. With regards to cleanup and this new state police database, so long as an owner decontaminates the property within 180 days of known meth contamination, their property cannot be listed on the publicly available database. Owners can have their properties removed from the public database if they receive a certificate of decontamination from a state certified inspector. Owners then must submit the certificate of decontamination to the Indiana State Police, who will remove the property from the list within 90 days. You may be wondering if there's any recourse for a property you own that may become meth contaminated by another individual, say a tenant. The answer is yes. They can be required to pay for actual damages to the property in addition to lost rent and the cost of decontamination.
This year, there were several bills that we had a hand in preventing from being enacted that would have had very negative effects on the real estate industry, such as a bill that would have lowered the requirements for out-of-state brokers seeking to come to Indiana to sell and list. That bill would have made it easier to be licensed in Indiana if you came from another state than it would be if you were an actual Hoosier citizen. That's just not a change that we can accept on behalf of our members. Another bill that was introduced that was frankly introduced for a very good reason, but had an unintended consequence. It would have imposed nearly impossible requirements on home inspectors to inspect attics and crawl spaces and other inaccessible areas in a home, actually enter those spaces, and if they didn't physically inspect, the actual home inspection would have been voided. Realtors have a long-standing exemption from the state's do not call list. This is an exemption that was fought very hard for many years ago when that law was first enacted. There was a bill introduced this session that would have eliminated that exemption. We opposed a bill that would have taken one more tool out of the toolbox of our members in helping them do their part to contribute to restoring a strong real estate market. This year, with the potential repeal of the business personal property tax, as much as $1 billion of tax revenue had the potential to be shifted onto other taxpayers, and in many cases and in many counties, that shift would have occurred onto homeowners. As an organization, we see the value of lower taxes across the board. The personal property tax on business in itself is not a wonderful tax, but the impact of completely repealing that tax would create a shift onto other taxpayers that we simply cannot stand for. The property tax relief achieved due in large part to advocacy from realtors across the state has proved a tremendous benefit to homeowners. One of the things that we work on daily at the State House is to make sure that some of those benefits aren't unintentionally unraveled and that additional tax burdens aren't placed on homeowners and other taxpayers. In the end, a compromise was made between local units, legislators, and the businesses seeking that tax reform to allow counties to have a cafeteria plan of options to allow them to make flexible decisions about business personal property tax that meld well with their own economic development priorities and goals. Married with that same compromise was the creation of a blue ribbon commission that will take a greater look at the impact of, among other things, a complete elimination of the business personal property tax. We believe that any large-scale discussion about tax reform should have a realtor at the table, and we fought to make sure that that was enacted into law. There will be a realtor at the table to participate in those discussions and make sure that the industry and homeowners are duly represented. 2 years ago, we saw a growing trend of very costly landlord registry and rental regulations being enacted at the local level through local ordinance. This trend was very concerning to us. In some locales, these rental fees on landlords were as high as $80 per door. Imagine the cost of this fee on your own business. Imagine the cost being passed on to renters out there. We oppose the real estate industry being singled out as a point of collection for revenue to offset local budget costs that might have little or nothing to do with real estate to begin with. So in 2013, the real estate industry collectively achieved passage of a moratorium on these new regulations at the local level. We understood that a permanent moratorium that would prevent local ordinances was unrealistic. In fact, there are realtors across the state that support local rental registries in their communities because their community has crafted that, it makes sense, and all in all, it's good for their community. The one-year moratorium against additional local landlord registration programs was set to expire this year. When that expired, we wanted to make sure that there was a good state level guidance and regulation that local units could look to make sure that there was no abuse of their local realtors, no abuse of local landlords, and no unnecessary and harmful collection of fees. The legislation that was passed has three components to it. First and foremost, it allows specifically for a local unit, if it so chooses, to adopt an ordinance creating a landlord registry. That landlord registry allows for a fee not to exceed $5 per property. A second component of the legislation would allow for third-party inspection of rental units operated by a landlord. This has two components to it. One, it allows the landlord to avoid duplication of efforts if they're already involved in some type of inspection of the property to begin with. Number two, it allows the regulatory program to be relieved of some of the burden of having to do on-site inspections at 100% of properties. Without this change, all landlords would be subject to regulatory inspection at all properties. This is a very good change in state law. The third component of the bill is the permitting of rental properties. The bill will allow local units to adopt an ordinance permitting rental properties, but does not allow them to charge a fee for it and does not allow a local ordinance to require education as a component and a criteria for that permit. Beginning July 1 of this summer, the new legislation will take effect. This state law, for the first time, will provide guidance for local units who already have the authority now to adopt landlord registries and inspection programs to make sure that there's uniformity across local units and to make sure that there are guidelines for those ordinances to follow so we don't get into the same problem we had before of singling out one industry as a revenue source for a strapped local budget. Realtors have a long history of participating in the formulation of public policy at the state level. We also have a very strong, sound reputation in advocating for our members, in advocating for the real estate industry, and in advocating on behalf of homeowners.